So I think he answered a lot of the questions. And can he win a big game? He didn't have the fair opportunity to win the playoff game, but they played 4 consecutive lose-and-go-home games in December, and they won them all. Now, only one was against credible competition in the Dallas Cowboys. The other 3 were against the Giants and Washington. But still, they won them all against divisional opponents, 2 of them in comeback fashion. And so he gets that box checked. He also stayed healthy throughout the entirety of the season before suffering the injury in the playoff game. So he checks that box. What I will say is I have 2 major concerns with Wentz. One of them is his health. And it is not because he got concussed. And we talked about yesterday that saying, oh, the concussion's another example of him being injury-prone, I think is an absurd statement. What is a fair statement is the play on which he got injured was another play where Carson Wentz went all for it, which is the way he is wired. He is running, he is going to be physical, and he's going to go head first when he can. Now, it is not his fault at all he got concussed. I want to be very clear on that because I said it yesterday. I will say it again. But you do have a level of concern with Wentz. That is, he wired in such a way, so competitive, and such a big, strong, physical guy who, by the way, maybe one of the negatives of playing Division II college football, or FCS is what they call it now, I guess, is that you don't have as many guys who can really punish you when you are trying to get the extra yard, make the extra play, because you don't have as many super high-level athletes that you have if you played Division I, if you played in the SEC, certainly in the NFL. That's a question. And the other one is one that we're going to have to wait and see, which is, can he win over a locker room for the entirety of a season the way he seemed to struggle with this year until the very end of the year when some of those bigger personalities and more veteran receivers got injured and their voices were removed from the locker room? Those questions remain. Brian, I've never questioned his talent. I've never questioned his toughness, even though he's gotten dinged a bunch. I think part of the toughness has led to the injuries. And I've never questioned his ability at his best to be almost as good as anyone in football. But those 2 questions to me about long-term durability and about the non-football part of being a quarterback still remain.
First of all, never question the FCS school. I went to a 1AA school myself, so let's start there. But I think Carson showed something toward the end of the season, the last quarter of the season, that, to your point, he didn't have those personalities, didn't have Deshaun, didn't have Nelson Aguilar, didn't have Alshon Jeffrey in the locker room. But he showed that even with lesser talent, he could be that force multiplier that Coach Mangini is always talking about, taking young talent that was unproven and making those guys look much better than they probably were. He also has showed that he could be a leader, even though it was in a small sample. So my biggest question is, can he do it for an entire season? Can you do that? I'm not worried about his health. I'm not worried about him getting hurt again. I think that play in the playoffs, I want my quarterback to go, all out in the playoffs. And so if you were ever going to make that play that he got hurt on, that's the time to do it when everything is on the line, when we were playing in the playoffs. And so I just think that Carson has to show the consistency that he can do it all season long.
Didn't he just do it all season long?
Well, no, he stayed healthy all season long. But there were some games where he just didn't play great. There were some games where he had a good 4th quarter, a good second half, but he didn't play good 4 quarters. In these last quarter of games, even though they won them all, even though he played well, the Cowboys game was the only game that he played well for 4 quarters.
Right. It was bad in the Giants game for the first 3 quarters.
Right.
And you could argue he was bad more often than good the first 3 quarters of the season when en route to them being 5-7. It wasn't just injuries and bad defense. Wentz had a fumbling problem and a turnover problem early in the season, which is, I think, what you're talking about.
Well, he produced, and that's what you want. He's still a young quarterback. I mean, he missed a lot of the portions of the season in his first 3 years and really the last 2 years, but he has to continue to prove that he can consistently do it. If he can do that, then I think he'll be absolutely fine. He has all the tools that you want. He's big, he's strong, he can make all the throws, he's athletic. He just has to be smarter in some of his decision-making.
The only question that I have about Carson Wentz is, can he win in the playoffs? Because we haven't seen it. And unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to witness it this past weekend because he got injured. Now, as far as everything else, we can talk about his leadership. We can talk about his ability to throw the football, what he does as far as size, all these things. He checks the box. Like, we talk about his leadership and winning over the locker room. Well, when you have personalities that are going to kind of conflict with one another, you're going to always have issues with one being kind of the alpha male and then another wanting to be the alpha male, but you're just not. And so when things aren't going your way, that's when you have to have a guy like Carson Wentz, typically your quarterback, that's going to say this is how things are. And it wasn't as if he was leading them down the wrong path. He wants the same thing. He wants it probably, if not more than anyone in that locker room, because he didn't really get a chance to experience a Super Bowl run. And so when I say the only question I have for Carson Wentz, can you win in the playoffs? Because he hasn't had the opportunity. You alluded to it. In December, he played pretty much playoff football.
Games. Yep.
I don't care who the opponent was. His expectation was to win, and he got it done.
But that is where the one asterisk goes alongside it. In addition to the fact that they weren't technically playoff games, they weren't playoff caliber opponents. So you won 4 consecutive games that were the same stakes as the playoffs,
Correct.
which is if you lose, your season's over. But the other reason people talk about playoff games and a team and a quarterback's playoff record as if the only thing that's different in the playoffs is the pressure and the stakes. The other thing that's different is the quality of competition. Every game you're playing is against a good or great football team. That's the other element of it, which is why it's why the injury in the Seahawks game was so unfortunate, because you're against an excellent team, a Hall of Fame quarterback, a great coach, a team that's been there before, and he got a half dozen snaps before he got knocked out of a football game he desperately wanted to go back into.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from First Things First, or go watch a few segments from our other shows on FS1.